least for me, fascinating. There are so many frameworks out there, and as you go through them, you see a lot of themes, a lot of topics kind of coming into each and every framework under different guises, under different names, under different kind of overloaded terms, right? And today we will take a look at one of those frameworks, which I think maybe not as deep as some other frameworks, but it touches on 6 coach stances that are absolutely necessary, absolutely crucial for us to be effective and efficient coaches. All right. So I would encourage everyone to participate. If you have questions, so as Sheree mentioned, we are going to use the group chat. If you have questions for me, either try to interrupt me, which might not work, or put your question in the chat and maybe prefix it with 3 question marks so that I know that's a question. And maybe between the slides, I would be able to easier attend to them.
Yeah.
Sounds good? Everybody's in good mood?
Sounds good. And
All righty.
Monitor the box. So.
All right, so let's get started. As I said, let me share my screen. Let's hope I share the right one, because there are.
Yep, it's right.
All right, so Self as Coach, this slide deck based on her quite famous book, and Pamela McLean, she is the executive director at Hudson Institute for Coaching in New York. And the book is Self as Coach, Self as Leader. And we'll just go into quite deep into details how she sees 6 pillars that a good coach base their experience, base their skills and practices. And before we go there, here's kind of our with Sheree pitch. So I'm Alex Kudinov, PST AKT, and my personal motto is helping you become a servant leader everyone loves working with. And Sheree, you all know Sheree, thanks for hosting us. And her motto is to live better than I found you with each encounter, and I can absolutely attest to she's living to her motto. So we paired up to deliver for now 2 Scrum.org classes in Dallas, Texas. So feel free to reach out to myself or to her for more details, and our APSM class in January. All right, so let's move on. So let's talk about what Pam calls life stances home-based. She based this on the teachings or on the work of Karen Horney's. And that's a very, very famous in psychology work called Life Endurance Stances. And she claims that every one of us, we obtain our, what she calls home-based behavior stance in our childhood, right? And it's a prevalent kind of opinion in psychoanalysis and psychology, right? And there are 3 of them. So one is moving towards, right? So it's characterized by a person being compliant, maybe helpless, maybe requiring approvals from his parents or his or her parents in the childhood, and managers, coaches, or co-workers in adulthood, right? And that person is striving to please others, to be liked, right? On the flip side, these people are very caring. They are very connected to the environment, to the ecology, to other people they are working, they are collaborating, they are connecting with, right? Kind of opposite base is moving against, right? It's not as attractive traits. Some people can come across as hostile. They might be fighting against whatever they choose to fight against with authority, environment, some actions, and all that. They are looking for protection. So security is really big with these people, and they take revenge. Uh, and they strive to be the best to be liked, right? So you see how it compares to moving towards those pleased to be liked, and these people are best to be liked. The coaches with moving against base are very direct. They are very action focused. And some claims that this is a very good trait for executive coaching, for example. They can fall into traps of being overly assertive, kind of overly direct, overly focused, overly forward, right? They are seeking recognition, and they fall into a trap of taking over client agenda and pushing the client into maybe the way they think is appropriate, right? And last but not least is moving away. So the coaches who reside in this base, the upside for that is that they create more space. They are really comfortable with stepping back to allow the clients to maintain the silence, to think through the questions, to think through situations, to reflect and deepen the potential breakthrough moments. And I don't know how about you, I had quite a few breakthrough moments in my coaching sessions, and when I was a coachee or I was a coach, and those are powerful moments. On the downside of that base, the coach can create so much space, can withdraw so much from a client that they disconnect from a client completely, leaving a client maybe in the state of ambiguity and not knowing what exactly we are doing in this session. So I would say my personal base, as I develop my coaching skills and I develop my coaching practice, it's kind of a cross between moving against and moving away, but more in the moving away territory, where I definitely saw myself withdrawing a little bit too much and leaving the client kind of a little bit in limbo. So these home base life stances, they feed really well into us seeing how we implement our coaching practice or implement our coaching conversations in the workplace. So Pam claims that there are 4 levels of implementation, and it starts with peer coaching and self-coaching, right? So it's kind of, I had a couple of clients who are very good at self-coaching. I just need to sit there and they would go through and they would just talk themselves through the problem, solve the problem, and then thank me for being quiet. That's really interesting experience. Then the classic one-on-one coaching is kind of your classic ICF coach, your classic maybe coactive coach, right? Where you are coached by internal or external coaches. Also, it includes team or group coaching, right? And manager as a coach of direct reports. This one is a little bit, you need to be a little bit careful because there's the power dynamics. There's always kind of the dynamics, especially in red organization, where the direct reports might be looking up to the manager, and his or her coaching might not be as effective or perceived not as a coaching, but as more with lack of trust, with more of a caution towards the leader, towards the manager. And if we go up these levels of implementation, definitely there's the coaching leadership style and coaching business and management culture that gets really high up in the organization and in the organizational hierarchy. Kind of how you look at the coaching world, how you look at your engagement with organizations, right? So with that said, with quite an introduction, let me introduce you the self as coach model. And you see it's copyrighted by the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara. And I think it's a fantastic model for us to remember, for us to follow and kind of keep in mind. Definitely, there is no perfection in any model. You remember that every model is just a simplification of the real world, right? The self as coach model consists of 6 pillars, and these are presence, empathy, feelings, boundaries, embodiment, and courage, right? In this picture, you might get a wrong impression that categories are really strongly defined, very well defined, right? But in reality, there's a really strong interplay between them. There is absolutely strongest interplay between presence and empathy and feelings. The courage absolutely mandatory for the coach to be present and to be empathetic. There is a strong correlation between those. And of course, you cannot be effective coach without setting really good boundaries with your coachees. So,
are you taking questions, or should we be waiting for questions?
Oh, sorry. I need to bring up the chat box, which I'm not particularly sure where it is.
No questions in the chat box yet, but if you have a question, you can go ahead and ask.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, is there a question, or that was a question about a question?
No, there was a question, but I'll type it in the chat box. Thank you.
All right. All right, let me move the chat box in here so that I can actually see that. All right, so one thing we need to remember looking at these six categories is that what Pam is saying, that the most important tool in the coach's toolbox is the self. And I will read from Doug Silby, who said, "We do the work on ourselves in order that we might be granted the privilege of working with our clients. Only through improving ourselves, only through continuous improvement, reflection, and working on all our qualities, are we privileged to help the clients to improve their lives." Are these categories? Do we need to show empathy or compassionate? I will shelve that question. I will address that when I'm talking about empathy. Thank you. And are these categories intermittently used? So are these categories intermittently used, or they are all used going after one after another? These are the skills, these are the pillars on which yourself as a coach are based on, right? So you attend to any and all of them at any time, right? So think about this. You take presence, you're present as a coach throughout the session. Throughout the session, you use empathy. Throughout the session, you recognize and attend to clients' feelings. You set the boundaries and you uphold the boundaries throughout the session or throughout your engagement. You embody yourself as a coach, and you might use techniques of embodying the feelings, of embodying emotions of the clients, right? And you absolutely have to be courageous to challenge the client to address their problems, to improve themselves. So to answer your question, yes, you use them all the time, right? And it's important for us to be mindful of these categories to be effective coaches. And empathy and compassion. Okay, let's move on. So let's start with the first pillar, which is presence. There is an absolutely fantastic book by Amy Cuddy called Presence. And I don't know if you read that, you might remember Amy Cuddy. She came onto the scene in, I think, 2014. And she made a big splash with power postures, like the Wonder Woman, right? And she claimed that power postures help to improve the confidence, help to improve life, and all that. Since then, the science behind her claims was a little bit questioned, right? But still, the book is absolutely fantastic in thinking of what presence is, and you as a coach can get a lot from that book in terms of what does it mean for me to be present with my client as a coach. And I absolutely love this fantastic definition of her. Presence is resonant synchrony with self. It's the third entity. It's the ecology. Think about it for a moment. You have to be in synchrony with your internal world. You have to be in synchrony with your client's world. And you have to be in synchrony with the ecology, with everything that's in the room. And that might go into our further conversation about 3 levels of listening, right? But it also has to be a resonant synchrony. It resonates with you as the coach at every moment in time you are in session. And another really interesting definition that I found is presence is confidence without arrogance. When we're talking about presence to ourselves, we mostly talking about those inner rumbling. If you are the coach, you would know, you can relate to what I'm talking about. That inner voice that usually kicks us off from our level 3, level 2 perch and drops us back to level 1 listening, right? It can be defined by judgments, biases, old stories, old beliefs, preoccupation with something. Something is going on in the room. I have a cat that is demanding to let her in. So that's breaks my presence right now, right? And inner chatter. I would say that out of these, judgment is the worst enemy of presence. And judgment can be of 2 sorts: judgment of the client, right? And judgment of self. And of the client, when they come to a problem, right, you know that we hold the client creative, resourceful, and whole, naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, right? And then we break this promise and we start judging them, we start judging their behavior, we start judging their abilities, right? That breaks the presence. And then judging ourselves is basically, I'm not good enough. What am I doing here? I'm not able to help this client. I'm just sitting there spending time. These all activities, these all mental inner rumbling can break our presence, can kick us back to level 1 listening, and it's not helpful. All right, let's move on. I don't see any questions that I need to attend to. So with presence to self, we will be served well if we keep in mind that everything that we hear, everything that we see from our client, we filter through a layer of biases, right? Biases are omnipresent and they are very powerful. If you want to learn a lot about biases, I strongly recommend Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It's basically the Bible of biases, and a really interesting read at it. But we'll go with a different model here. So Jay Galston, in his Just Listen, he specifies these 5 biases that we filter all the information that we take in from our hearing, from our visual, listening, kinesthetic, sensory perceptions. We push them through this layer of biases, which he calls GGNEE, by the first names of gender, generation, nationality, education, and emotion. And think about it. When you talk to somebody, right? When you talk to somebody, when you see somebody in a conversation face-to-face or on the phone, just think to some conversations that you had. of course, we notice the gender, right? Of course, we notice, well, it's a woman and I'm a man, we're talking, right? Or it's same gender people, right? Generation, well, older, younger, we all probably heard the sometime inappropriate jokes about millennials, right? That's your biased filter, right? And the thing is, it's really sad that we are getting to a point where we dismiss the goodness that generation is bringing to the world by just saying, oh, those millennials, right? That's your biased filter for the generation. And same thing happens with the old generation, with baby boomers, right? Right now in the workplace, there's a huge problem when a new generation of managers come in and they have to manage old workers. There's a huge problem in the workplace, right? Again, that's the bias. Nationality and ethnicity, I don't even want to touch on that one. It's so prevalent, right? We need to be very conscientious of what we are doing, right? Education, uh, education, the way I think about education is, and I was kind of self-reflecting on that one, is that, for example, my circle of communication, people I talk to, people I communicate with, it's very homogeneous in its education. Everybody probably has college degrees or high school. Everybody kind of into this continuous mode of self-education, right? Um, the blind spot that I probably have is, let's say, blue collar workers, the people with less than high school education, right? And I need to be mindful of this bias when I talk to these people. Again, holding them naturally creative, okay, resourceful and whole, right? Without regard to their background. And last but not least are emotions. Emotions are really prevalent in our conversations, right? And some of us are better, some of us are worse with dealing with emotions, right? And we need to be aware of those. You all know that coaching, emotions and feelings are an intrinsic part of coaching, right? I hear all day long that, well, when when emotions are involved, it's not coaching, it's therapy. No, emotions are part of the client experience, right? That we have to deal with. And at the same time, when we talk about this thing and when we talk about inner chatting, and on top of that inner chatting, all these biases affect us, right? We are looking at that and we are asking ourselves questions like, what should I ask next, right? Or what is the best solution? Have I experienced something to that, right? So for example, have I experienced something that this person from a different generation is talking about, or this person from a different country is talking about? How can I coach them without having similar experience? Am I doing the right thing? Am I failing my client? So the point here is that the biases are really powerful forces that affect our presence. And the more conscientious you are of these biases and the more aware you are of your failings and which bias affects you most, the better a coach you are.
So Alex, this brings us to a great opening point for one of the questions in the chat. It's how can present stance be developed more?
So I think that presence is a skill, right? Presence is a skill that based on self-awareness. So as you are developing awareness of yourself, of your biases, as you are developing awareness of your skills, right? Of the trigger points that kind of send you down the chute of level 1 listening, right? By developing your self-awareness, by developing your your attentiveness to the clients, right? So again, level 2, level 3 listening. And by developing what we call availability to the client, right? So get rid of everything that is not pertinent to the session. Focus on the client. Focus on what they say, what they look like, what they feel, what they bring to the table. Focus on the whole person, on the person as a whole. Working on those underpinnings, you're working on your presence. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that there was a survey of executive officers in the United States, of C-level executives. And the question was, what one of the trait or characteristic can you use more in your daily work? And the answer was awareness. These C-level executives value awareness of themselves, how they behave, how they come across, how they go through daily life, as the most important trait for them. So I think presence and awareness are tightly linked.
So then there's two other questions here that I think fit in really well at this point. One is about emotional intelligence, and how does the coach's emotional intelligence play into this? Do they have to have emotional intelligence? And then the other is self-presence the same as self-actualization?
So I would postpone emotional intelligence question till we talk about emotions, and I think we will talk a little bit about that. I don't talk about EQ directly, but hopefully you will get some answers there.
Okay.
And self-actualization. Let's think together about that. Self-actualization is at the top of Maslow's pyramid, right? So it's basically, if you remember the pyramid, at the bottom you have what you need, and everything above is what you actually want, right? So of course the coaches want to be continuously self-actualizing, right? They continuously want to be better, for the world, to be better for the customers, right? For the clients. I don't think there's one-to-one correlation between self-actualization and presence. Presence is kind of your attribute as a coach, what you use to be better. Self-actualization, in my mind, is more a holistic approach to your developing yourself in your life. Did that answer your question? Who was that?
It was Banu.
Banu?
Yeah, he said yes in the chat box. And then one last one here, and then we'll let you keep going, is how can we reduce bias? Any suggestions or techniques?
So Andrew, thanks for the question. It's kind of interesting. So I'm really fascinated with the topic of biases, right? And however many books I read on the topic or articles on blogs, there's a consensus that there is no way to conscientiously reduce your biases. They are part of us. They are part of our upbringing. All you can do is to be self-aware of your failings, to be self-aware of these biases inside of you, right? And that self-awareness hopefully at some point gives you a pause in a conversation, in interaction, in communication, and asks you, what am I doing here? The way I'm responding to the person, or the way I'm communicating with this person or this team, whatever your coaching environment is, do I bring some of my known biases, right? I think the first step is to learn the biases. The second step is to learn which biases you are most prone to. And third step is to work on your awareness day in, day out, self-awareness.
So it sounds like it's more about managing bias.
It's management, yeah. It's management, it's discipline. But you read Daniel Kahneman, the first thing he says in his book, If you think you will read this book and you will absolutely get rid of these biases, stop reading right now. You will not. You will only be able to, there are two kind of things. You will be able to identify them within your behavior if you kind of self-manage well, right? And it will give you opportunities to see these biases, see these behaviors in others, and kind of when you are a third person to communication, right? All right. So let me get to these two real quickly, and we'll need to move on. Will you coach them after identifying? I would probably bring that up, but it's not my job as the coach to force coach them on those biases, right? I can be a mirror to their behavior and say, hey, this is what I saw, and this is the framework I'm basing my observation on. What do you think? Do we need to spend any time on that? And it's up to the coachee, to the client, to figure out whether that's a problem or they don't want, or they want or don't want to work on that. And what is good, managed bias or control bias? I'm not particularly sure what the difference is. I mean, I would say more kind of managed bias, because you, like, it depends on your level of awareness. Control is more kind of stringent, and you don't allow it to get out of hands, and we're all failable. I know after some conversations, I'm looking at the conversation, I'm like, oh, that's my emotional bias came into, right? So sometimes it's just not possible to control it. All right. So let's move on. So presence to relationship. It also, in some sources, in some frameworks, it also referred to presence to the third entity. There's a really interesting quote from Irvin Yalom, and he says that immediacy refers to the immediate event of the session, to what is happening here in this relation, in this in-betweenness, the space between me and you and now. So realize that if you are doing one-on-one coaching, there are two people in the room, right? And what sometimes happens is that when client hires a coach, they want to solve a problem, and they want coach to solve the problem for them. And that's a big misconception understanding about coaching, right? So what this pyramid shows you is that it's not the client who gives the coach the permission or the power to fix the client. Remember, the client is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. We are not fixing our clients. We both, coach and client, give permission, give power to the relationship, to everything that we're building, to the trust that we're building, to the room, to the ecology. We give our powers to that relationship, and from that relationship, the power flows back to the client, helping them to work through the problems they want to solve. In order to create this relationship, what Pam is saying is that we need to create a strong resonant chamber within our ecology, within our environment. As coaches, we will serve our client best as if we are noticing the whole client. We're not noticing only their words or their emotions or kind of undertext or their physical appearance and all that, but we notice them as whole, including voice, language, message, emotion, body, values, etc., etc. And these kind of, we merge the unique coaches domain, unique client domain, and we co-create with our clients this third domain when coach and coachee comes together. And Peter Hawkins, who has absolutely fantastic book in his leadership team coaching, he refers to this structure as we-Q, as speaking on what's going on between between the client and the coach. You heard me kind of alluding to that, but I want to stress more that as the coach, not only we're working with the whole client, but also with the whole ecology. We're using what's in the room, right? We are noticing everything about client and everything that surrounds the client. And we will close the presence discussion with some thoughts about presence to ecology, right? And ecology is, ecology is kind of weird word here, like, and I'm not a native speaker, so when I read ecology, I was kind of, well, that's not what I was thinking. But when we say ecology within coaching context, it refers to much broader surroundings than just kind of physical presence. Physical location might be like a restaurant or quiet room, or maybe you coach a client in the car in rush hour, which is probably not a good idea, right? Ecology also includes corporate culture. It might include some corporate events that affect the client at this time. It might include geopolitics. Your client might show up to the session and might not be able to get rid of kind of the mundane events of the day, right? And they probably might need to clean up their slate before you get into the coaching session. Cultural differences are the biggest players in the ecology, which we as coaches should be aware of, right? Immediate surroundings, physical location, and maybe electronic devices, and broader ecosystem as the corporate culture, geopolitics, specific industry, cultural differences, and all that. All right. All right, let's move on. I don't see any questions. So let's move to the second part of this fantastic framework, and it's empathy. And empathy is, so this is monkey see, monkey do. There's a lot of work in psychology, there's a lot of work in biology was done on monkeys and on mirror neurons. And this monkey see, monkey do actually refers to the effects when one monkey was given a banana or some other traits, and the scientist monitors monkeys' brains. Other monkeys in the same cage, they actually experience same neurological effects as the monkey who was eating banana. So, and through this multitude of experiments, they came to a notion that in our brains there are mirror neurons that actually mirrors the emotions and sometimes even physical state and physical experiences of other monkeys and other people. So the other interesting example is that if your coworker gets a paper cut, you might cringe. You might look at it like, ugh, right? That's your mirror neurons that are firing off, right? So think about these things. Why is that we might often tear up when somebody is kind to us, when somebody offers their help? Why is that we might get warm and fuzzy feelings that when somebody understands us, really understands us at a deeper level, really listen to us? Sometimes we are moved by a simple, warm and genuine "Are you okay?" question, right? What we know from the practice is that our coachees sometimes or oftentimes come to our sessions with a big mirror neuron gap, right? And empathy is important for the coaches, as that's basically one of the pillars of our abilities, but also it's important for the coaches to attend to their problems and to solve their problems. So empathy is really big topic and really big, and going forward we'll just focus on the empathy from the coach perspective. So empathy continuum, as Pam calls it, it spans from too little or limited to too much, right? And there's an interesting story. So there's an interesting book by Will Wise, Ask Powerful Questions, and I think he explains this best through a story. Imagine you go with your friend in the middle of winter to a frozen lake, to a cabin in the woods, right? And you're looking forward to that trip, and you're in the cabin, and you kind of get some tea, right? And your friend is so anxious to go to the lake, he just leaves you in the cabin and goes to the lake. And you're sitting by the window, you see your friend on the lake, and you kind of drinking your tea, and you see your friend kind of falling into the water, right, and starts drowning. So you have three options to respond, right? So on the limited side of empathy, you might choose to just sit there, keep drinking your tea, right, and thinking, how does your friend feel drowning in that cold water as his kind of boots are getting filled with water and as he's losing his strength? That's apathy. So it's an adequate connection. It's cognitive only. You recognize the feeling, but you don't recognize that on your deeper emotional level. You recognize that with your brain, right? On the other side, imagine your different reaction. You see your friend is started drowning, you drop everything and you rushing out of the door, you run into the lake, and you fall into the water and you start drowning. And you feel same cold, and the water fills your boots and it drags you to the bottom, and you're losing your strength, and you kind of start getting weaker and weaker. You are feeling everything that your friend is feeling. Is that helpful? Are you able to help your friend when you are in the same kind of boat with him or in the same lake with him? That is sympathy. That's when coach is as a sponge absorbing client experience. It leads coach to basically rescue mode, right? Coach at that point, he or she crosses into client story and becomes a rescuer, rather than stepping back and helping the client to see the story. If we move to the center where we are connected, right, we are at our best as coaches, right? And at that point, if we go back to our lake story, you might call 911. Before leaving the house, you might find a rope and pick up a blanket. You go to the shore of the lake and you throw the rope to your friend. You pull him out of the lake and you envelope him in the blanket, and you kind of bring him back to the house. That's connected empathy. That's enough empathy to help your friend, to help your client, right? It's walking in client's shoes without wearing those shoes, right? And at that point, if we practice connectedness as coaches, we notice the feelings, we notice the cues as those feelings arise, we honor those feelings with the client, right? And we avoid over-identifying with them. We also, if you think about what NLP is saying about over-identifying with the client, when we are looking at our internal process and coaching with that, there are three ways that we can fall into a trap. There's transference, there's cross-transference, and there's parallel process. So transference, just kind of not to dwell on that, but give you a really quick idea. Transference is when the client, for example, transfers his feelings, beliefs, habits from, let's say, a strong figure person in his childhood. For example, his father was a very strong person, strong-willed person, right? And the client might transfer that, his reverence to his father or his obedience to his father, into workplace, onto his managers, or maybe onto his coach, right? That's what we call transference. Countertransference is when this person on the other side, the manager or the coach, sees this behavior. What might happen that they were actually that kind of father, and they have a child at their home who behaves in that way. So countertransference would kind of suggest to the coach or the manager or whoever else to behave in the same way. And parallel process is what a lot of coaches are prone to. When we hear the story, right, we drop to our level 1 and we start attending to our own stories in the similar vein. We start remembering our own feelings in the similar environments, and we start remembering our own doings and not doings, and that's when we don't serve our clients well. So basically, as I said, the connectedness, when we are able to accurately imagine coaches' experience and able to walk in their shoes without wearing them, we are able to take client perspective without losing our balance and boundaries. All right. Don't see any questions.
Nope, no pending questions.
All right, let's move on. So we are to our third pillar, which is feelings. And I want to start with a question, and kind of maybe just raise your hand or kind of put 1 or 0 if you heard that, or if you said that in the last week or so. I personally often say, he made me feel like crap. He made me feel really sad or really bad. Have you guys said that or heard that or experienced that? Heard? Yes, definitely, yes. Perfect, so raise hand. So I don't see anybody who didn't see or heard that, right? So here's the thing. The world and its actions, they are not capable of making us feel anything. They are not. The world and those actions, they are just facts. The way we react to the world and to the reality is our own choosing. Think about it this way. If actual events that as they are happening could make us feel anything, right, or could bring up our emotions to the surface, right, probably everybody who would see or hear same occurrence, same event, they would experience same emotion. And that's not the fact. That's absolutely not the fact. So what's happening, there's a missing link between our perception of the world, of the physical world, and our emotions. And really good zinger that I like to use by Eleanor Roosevelt. She basically said, no one can hurt you without your consent. You give your consent to feel specific emotions, to experience specific emotions. So the missing part between see, hear, and emotions are the stories that we are telling ourselves. And the stories, I like this word. I'm a big fan of the crucial conversation framework. If you never heard, please read. Fantastic book. It let me grow by leaps and bounds as a person within my personal relationship and my work relationship. But that's actually the stories that we are telling ourselves as we are experiencing the real world. If you are into NLP, these what they call the deletions, generalizations, distortions, and personalizations of the actual events as we take them, we process them, we respond to them, or we create a mental picture, we respond to them, and we get some outcomes, right? So I want to quickly talk about the difference between emotions and feelings because I know that I didn't know the difference till probably a couple months ago, and I found really interesting explanation that if you guys know, you know. If not, maybe it would be useful for you. An emotional is a physiological experience that provides us with data of our world, right? And emotion has two components to that. It has motivational component, and motivational component can be of three kinds. It can be approach, it can be avoid, and it can be attack. So every emotion has this motivational component. And the second component is actually how the emotions are manifested themselves. And that's the conscious part of the emotions. And that's what we call feelings. So feelings is the conscious part of the emotion. And feelings are affected by a range of circumstances. It can be affected by moods. It can be affected by our sensory perceptions, like what we feel, what we touch, what we hear, what we see at specific moment. And it can be affected by our physiological state, right? And a lot of misconception, a lot of misunderstanding when we are trying to work through emotions, when we're trying to work through some problems, come from that we are focusing a lot on feelings, and we are not attending to emotions. We are not attending to the motivational part of the emotions, right? And it's kind of funny is that your feelings might differ, right, as your emotion and motivational part stay constant. And that's why we sometimes don't achieve the goals that we want to achieve. Right. And as I said, look, there are many ways to look at this. There are many ways, many frameworks that attend to the difference between the reality and perception, right? In NLP, the basic presupposition is that map is not territory. In coactive, we call these perspectives, right? And in balance, we go around a lot of perspectives and coach around them. Coactive coach, crucial conversations call these stories. So the key to get our emotions right, and therefore the response and outcomes, is to master our stories, is to look at all these perspectives, right? Is to look at our maps that we have in our brain and ask the question, are these the stories that actually represent the reality? Can I improve my map? What is the most resonant perspective that I can pick here to achieve the best result, right? These are basic steps, again, from crucial conversations that you can go through that will allow you to get in sync with your stories and make sure that the other party in the conversation, in argument, in dialogue, understands where you're coming from. So if there's a misunderstanding, and usually there is, usually we go through, here's our perception, here's what we mean, here's what we say, here's what our person hears, and here's what the other person understands. And we know that what we mean and what they understand sometimes don't match, right? So in order for them to be closer on the on the meaningful level, right, you can go through these 5 steps. You focus on the facts, you state your facts. Here's what I see, here's what I hear. You tell your story. Here are the stories that I'm telling myself. Here's how I perceive these facts in my world. You ask for their path. What do you think? What do you see? How do you perceive these events? What do they tell you? What behaviors or what thoughts, what feelings these events bring in you? Talk tentatively. If you basically talk as a matter of fact, here are the facts and here how I feel it, and that's absolutely the right way to do that. You will not get any constructive feedback or constructive dialogue with your partner or with your counterpart in this conversation. And encourage testing. Look, and I don't know how many people here are coming from agile environment, but in agile we are all about testing. We're all about running experiments, inspection and adaptation, right? So offer some small tests. How can we look at it differently? What other perspective we can explore? What actions can we take to get closer on the same page or in the same book about these facts? All right. No questions. Let's keep moving. So as we work with our clients, as we kind of self-improve as coaches, I think it's really useful to be aware of the range of feelings continuum. And it ranges from little to no access to extensive, right? And what it basically says that as coaches, as we are work with clients from the all walks of life, it really pays off to enhance and to enrich our own vocabulary, our own perception of ourselves. Again, I keep coming back to this self-awareness, right? And improving your range of feeling continuum is the integral part of improving yourself as a coach. And this is one of the most extensive vocabulary of emotions that I could find. And you can go to that link and download this vocabulary. I actually tested myself, and I used 7% of these words. Like I did not know about half of those words, but I claim my ESL and all that, right? But still, that could tell you how poor my range of feeling continuum is. And I make conscious effort to improve that and literally just go here and read and learn these words and learn what they mean and how my experience, how my feelings match to that, right? All right, so moving on, no questions about feelings, emotions, we're all good? Perfect. All right, so let's move on to boundaries. Boundaries is also an interesting topic. Remember that as coaches, we are working with our clients in the system. If you are in an organization that follows an organizational system, even if you are in one-on-one coaching, you are in the relationship in that third entity to which we delegated our power to, right? Identifying the boundaries of the system is of paramount importance. Boundaries is one of the attributes Donella Meadows in her Thinking in Systems identified as some the attributes that actually can make or break our thinking, can make or break the outcomes as we are thinking through the system. Think about it this way. Everything is a system in the world, right? And if I'm sitting here in my home office, right, it's kind of a system, and the temperature is quite comfortable, and my boundaries are the walls. If I expand to my whole house, well, there might be some areas in the house where it's a little bit too warm or a little bit too cold. If I expand the boundaries to kind of my street and all that, well, it was really cold this morning in Houston, right? And I can expand it over and over, right? So that kind of gives you idea of what boundaries I'm talking about, right? So again, you absolutely gotta have the boundaries, but you need to be really acutely aware whether your boundaries are too small and you are not taking enough information. These boundaries prevent you from taking the person as the whole person, or they are too large and a lot of information that comes at you is basically just the noise, right? When you start thinking in systems, it actually turns your thinking 180 degrees. And systems thinking has three very important consequences. First of all, it basically says almost nothing in the world has direct cause and effect. We got used to think that, well, if I don't know, if I turn the stove, right, the kettle on the stove will get warm, right? So that's cause and effect. If you look at the stove as the kettle as the system, right, there's much more going on there and much stronger reinforcing feedback loops that are going on between the stove and the kettle, right? So everything are feedback loops, whether they are reinforcing or whether they are balancing. The system thinking remove what we call anthropocentricity from your thinking. Um, when you turn on the stove, you basically say, well, I turn on the stove, and you are the central piece to that system, right? When you start to that action, when you start looking at the system, you are just an actor who applies a lever to a part of the system, and nothing else in the system depends on you. So the person is not a center of the system anymore, which leads us to the third and probably the most important outcome. And this is, we use this in coaching all day long. The system is blameless. There's no single entity to blame in the system. Everything is a loop. We can find a lot of leverage points to apply levers to and to move the system to one way or the other, but there is no blame to place in the system. So when client comes to you with blaming others or blaming himself or herself or blaming acts of God or doing some of that kind, right? If you go back to your system thinking, you should realize that, well, there's no blame. There are only levers that we can apply. We can help the client to look at the system as a whole and see what they experience from the systems thinking perspective, right? Going back to the boundaries, boundaries can be permeable, right? And we can, these are not bad. The only bad experience that you would have is whether you would not have boundaries, right? Then basically you're probably not doing good coaching. Permeable boundaries, if you manage them correctly, you can, right? But they are dangerous, as with permeable boundaries, we can quickly jump to others' experience and over-identify with the client. Remember that example with a lake, right? We can just go and drown with the lake with our friend, right? And permeable boundaries, they make it really, really difficult to add value to in the coaching work. If we have strong boundary, right, it will allow us to consciously notice when we have this pull to collude with the client, when we are not courageous enough to push back, right, when we are able to resist. And when we experience that urge to rescue our client, right, and we resist, that means that we have strong boundaries. When we want to add value to the client and to the work and take on the work that belongs to the client, and we resist, that are strong boundaries. So the good example of good boundaries, right? For example, the client often cancels the appointment at the last minutes, right? And you are seething, you're like, well, it's my time, and he breaks the promise and all of that, right? That would be permeable boundary, right? And next time when your client arrives apologizing for late cancellation, you basically say, oh, no worries. I understand things come up and you're still fuming on the inside. That's the example of permeable boundary. If you had strong boundary, your response might be different. I appreciate the apology, but more importantly, I find myself wondering if this happens just with me or if it's something we ought to take a look at that is happening in other places and may be important to our work, maybe happening with other people you work with. So we talked a little bit about the ranges of boundaries, right? And they go from diffuse or permeable boundaries, where we fall into our rescue mode, right? We want to help by taking the work that belongs to the client, right? Client hurts, client is full of emotions, and coach walking in the shoes of the client while wearing the shoes of the client. Client makes demand and coach is there to please, right? The agile boundaries, when the coach is responsive enough, but not succumbing to the pull to rescue the client, right? Is when in the middle of the story, the coach can step out of the story and observe the story, right? So remember that walking in client's shoes while not wearing them, right? The coach is noticing and asking about clients' feelings and clients' emotions, right? And that's one of the core ICF competencies that we as coaches, members of ICF, have to exhibit, right? And coach notice a lot, coach notice client demands, right? And observes and puts a mirror in front of the client and asks him what's going on, right? Rigid boundaries on the other side is when the coach doesn't tap into client story, right? When we miss a lot of kind of underlying, when we're probably just listening to the words and not noticing the client as the whole person. And as I'm talking about that, it really, so you remember at the beginning, I said that all these 6 areas, they are permeable, right? They kind of really connected. So if you remember the slide with the range of the empathy, right, from non-existent to strong, right? It's same with these boundaries, right? So the rigid boundaries does not allow coach to be as effective. The diffuse boundaries will, it's not going to be coaching, right? It's going to be commiserating session. And the agile boundaries is where the real coaching begins, where the real breakthrough occurs. All right, so here are a couple lessons from systems thinking. First and foremost, the homeostasis rules. If you heard that before, that's good. If not, that's a kind of basic idea that the system resists the change, and we want stability. We tend to gravitate to a static state that we got used to, even if our habits do not serve us well in that environment. The coach would serve the client well if the resistance to the change is appreciated, is noticed, and kind of the mirror is shown to the client, right? There is no single root cause, no one to blame. We talked about that. Everything is interconnected with everything else. My home office is a part of my bigger house. The bigger house is on the street is in the city, and so on and so forth, right? The fourth one is interesting. Triangles are the basic building blocks. I'm not going to go into much details. That's outside of our today's session. But basically, the idea is that when the client is hurt, when the client is anxious about his or her relationship with a second person or with a second entity, he or she tends to unload this anxiety into a triangle, right? So how many times have you seen, let's say you don't have a good relationship with your manager, you had a conflict, he berated you or something, and instead of dealing with that situation, you go and you complain to your team members, you gossip, you kind of complain to your friends that, oh, that manager he's doing this, he's doing that. You're creating a triangle, right? And triangle are very destructive for your relationships, right? Triangle don't solve the problem. Triangle mask the problem. They are very destructive in the longer term, right? The systems all have patterns, right? And starting noticing and starting learning the patterns is actually what will make you a much better coach when you just learn how to notice the whole client, but across the sessions, across the relationship, when you start noticing the patterns in the behavior, the patterns in the actions, the patterns in their emotions, that's what builds a really awesome coach. Failure is discovery in disguise. I like this from the presupposition from NLP that there are no failures, just feedbacks, right? And we agile people all know that. Small interventions have big impact, and most of what occurs in systems is not personal, right? We tend to take a lot of stuff personally. Oh, how many times? Oh, my boss didn't say good morning this morning. He might be hitting me, right? Again, different perspectives, kind of different stories that we are telling ourselves that are not particularly true. All right. So embodiment. Embodiment. I will go through this real quick. So that basically chimes back to the presence really well, right? And basically losing your center to the inner chatting. We talked about inner chatting a lot. So I will just skip this slide. The idea is here that if we are very well attuned to the body, to our body as the coach, we can better sense emotion in our body, and we can correspondingly better sense emotion in the ecology in our clients. If you are interested to learn more about embodiment, coactive model delve a little bit deeper into that, right? And they talk more about embodiment. They talk about that in the process. Let's talk real quickly about courage. So psychological courage is the willingness and courage to face up to our inner fears and long-held habitual ways of being. You remember I was talking about the kind of parallel process, right? When you hear the story from a client and you kind of start regurgitating your own story, and you're actually not with the client, and you're not fessing up that you are in your own story. Well, the courage, you're not courageous to bring it up, right? The psychological courage is most relevant to our work because to do the best work as the coaches, we need the willingness to confront our own fears, right? And confronting that will bring our best to our clients. So we need full presence. We need full presence to spot opportunities to exercise our courageous abilities. Well-balanced empathy. It allows us to express courageous comments and courageous comments in a way that actually invites client, not pushes away clients, but invites clients to consider it. The courage allows us the access to the range of feelings and allows the coach to meet the client where they are. If we're talking about boundaries, strong boundaries prevent a coach from being drawn into a client's story and allow it to courageously observe and mirror it back, mirror their observation back. And centering ourselves, having a great embodiment and focusing on embodiment, it allows us to stay strong and stay attuned and provide steady support about the proceedings, provide steady support to our clients, right? And steady support when the stakes in the conversations are high. With that said, here's kind of the total overview of the model that we went through. Just to remind you that presence is all about being present in the moment, being present with a client, what NLP probably calls immediacy. Am I quieting my inner chatter, right? And am I losing my assumptions and loosening my assumptions and belief? Do I hold the truth as I see it loosely and offer it to the client with no attachment to that? In empathy, am I deepening my capacity to connect? Is basically the working alliance, right? And asking myself, just enough, too much, or we need more, right? Does my range of feelings allow me to travel with ease where my clients need to go? Do I have some feelings, some emotions that prevent me from following the clients, that prevent me from working with a client? Am I noticing important patterns and themes that client is always sometimes oblivious to, right? Do I keep my boundaries strong? Am I invested in regular grounding and centering myself? That talks to embodiment. And last but not least, courage. Am I seeing and seizing the opportunities to turn up the heat and use my courage by sharing observations and uncovering the blind spots? And that's all I had for today. Thank you very much. My last slide, if you're interested, is the bibliography. Kind of all the books that I pulled from that I mentioned. If you're interested, I would really suggest some of these.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Alex. This was great. We saw a lot of some comments throughout, like, could we extend this for 2 hours? Not today. We can't extend it for 2 hours, but perhaps we can do some more. And so this was great. If you want to stop sharing,
Yep.
I'm going to share. And for people in the room, if it's okay, we're going to do a quick retro. And I would like to have you use the annotate tool, which is available. It should be at the in your little bar that allows you to do your controls. It's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. And so I have a slide up here, and if you would click on annotate, you can choose a color in your format. And if you would choose a color and make a little markup here on this, just anywhere on this slide will do. Green would represent the information presented today was great info, just the kind of stuff we're looking for. A yellow dot or a yellow mark of some kind would indicate, oh, this is okay. It, you know, okay stuff, I stayed. And red would indicate, yeah, not for me, not sure why I stayed through this. So if we could just get a little bit of feedback on the type of information we presented today, that would be awesome to understand, so we can make sure that in the future we're presenting the right stuff. So it looks like we got a couple of green marks there. If you're having trouble with annotate, let me know. And this is just a quick way for us to get some feedback and remain kind of anonymous. Okay, so a few green marks, good deal. I'll give you about another 15 seconds or so. There's a green. All right, great session from Tanya. That was her comment in the box there. Okay, I want to go to one other thing. I'm gonna clear notes. And then what about style? presentation style. This was the type of style you like. Oops, that's my red mark. I was trying to move.
Oh, Cherie, really?
Sorry about that. I was trying to move something out the way. And so style you like, I'm still not able to move things without killing stuff. Or yellow is okay, or red, no, I just stuck it out. It was tough. I like the content, but style was kind of rough on me. Ignore my 2 red marks there. So that'll help us to know in the future how to present. So I see some 2 thumbs up, see some green marks. So, okay. Any others? We've got some marks having trouble with annotation. She's green dot voting, green tools, green. So some greens in the comment boxes. That works well. And then last question, the Meetup time box. I'm going to clear again. 1 yellow on the presentation style. Sorry, my grandson's in the background. And then the time box for the Meetup. Just right, too short, or too long? So we got a mix of things there.
If you do the heart, it always red. just be careful.
Apparently, there's no green heart.
Oh yeah,
Right.
that's funny. That's funny. I didn't even notice that. I saw heart and assumed yes. Good idea. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. Thank you for feedback on that. That's helpful for us to be able to get some things, make sure that in the future we're presenting things that you like and in the way you like them. And then I want to do our giveaway. Alex, do you want to take just a second and tell us a bit about the giveaway that you are sponsoring?
Sure. So I'm still in training. I'm still working with Cherie. She's helping me through my PCC with ACF, and I'm starting my coactive certification in January. Right. So the 3 sessions for your topics, right? And we'll absolutely love working with you.
Awesome. So he's going to do some coaching for you all, and I'm going to make you responsible for telling me if your name is not, oh wait, trying to type on the wrong piece. K-Y-O-M-I. Let me know if your name is not here on the wheel, and I will add it. I have 2 people who have phone numbers, so I didn't know if your name's here or if you were just on the phone. So 214 area code and 425 area code is your, are you also on video? You're on mute if you're trying to tell me that you are not one of these people. All right, so then we have entered into the raffle here. We've got Jessica Manohar, Amalia, Andrew, Kayomi, Aparna, Tanya, Jaram, Matt, Banu, and Seisha. So I'm going to shuffle these up. And
you can take me out, Cherie.
okay. Where are you? Oh, there you are. I will pull you out. All right, I'll shuffle these up and click to spin.
Wow.
All right, Seisha, you know how cool. So if y'all are not going to clap, then the wheel will clap for you. So Seisha, I will, if you can go into the chat and email Alex or Mark Alex directly and give him your contact information, then you and he can get together one-on-one and figure out how y'all are going to do your 3 coaching sessions. And thanks a lot, everybody, for joining. I did record this, and as soon as I can, I'll get it out on our YouTube channel, and I'll post a note in the meetup. So thanks for participating, and see you in a couple of weeks, where I believe in a couple of weeks is going to be Lucia Baldelli and Christine Thompson, who are going to be doing a coaching technique called immunity mapping. And so look forward to seeing you, and invite a friend.
Thank you.
Have
Bye-bye.
a great weekend.
Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thanks, guys.